Some of the crops already in your garden may be doing things you've never been told about. Things that show up in clinical trials, in brain scans, in blood tests that measure whether Alzheimer's has started before a single symptom appears. One crop on this list produced blood markers like that. Another matched a common painkiller in a head-to-head clinical trial. Another has evidence linking a specific dietary pattern to cutting Alzheimer's risk by more than half. You may already be growing most of them. What changes today is what you know about what's already in your ground. 10 crops. Let's get into it. Rosemary. Most of you already grow it, maybe in a pot by the back door, maybe tucked into a border where it's quietly thrived for years. If anyone ever called it a memory herb, you probably smiled and thought, well, that's a charming old idea. It turns out it's not just an old idea. Here's what the science actually found. Researchers tested rosemary on a group of older adults, people in their mid-70s. Those exposed to the scent of rosemary oil scored measurably better on memory and speed tests than those who weren't. Real recall. Tested. Documented. The mechanism is simpler than you'd expect. Rosemary contains a compound called 1,8-cineol. That compound gets absorbed through the lungs into the bloodstream, where researchers believe it slows the breakdown of acetylcholine, one of the brain chemicals your mind uses to form and hold memories. Think of acetylcholine as the messenger your brain relies on to file things away. Rosemary helps keep that messenger working. Picture this. You've probably brushed past that rosemary bush 100 times without thinking about it. Every warm afternoon when a breeze carries the scent through a kitchen window, that's not just atmosphere. There may be something real happening. But here's the catch most people never hear. The same study found that a high dose of rosemary reversed the effect. Memory performance went down, not up. The culinary amount, the kind you'd use in cooking, the kind drifting off a plant on a warm afternoon, that's the beneficial range. More is not better. In this case, more quietly works against you. So if you're already growing rosemary, you're already in the right zone. Don't go adding it to everything at once, thinking you're doubling the benefit. You're not. Rosemary, the herb most people grow for the smell, turns out to be doing something quietly useful for your mind at the same time. And if that's what a familiar herb can do, wait until you hear what one of the most common kitchen staples has been doing wrong for decades. Almost everyone makes this mistake. That's next. Garlic. Nearly every gardener I've ever met grows garlic. It goes in the ground in autumn, comes up in spring, one of the most reliable, satisfying crops you can grow. But there's a mistake most people make with it every single time they cook it, and it quietly destroys most of what makes garlic valuable for your heart. Here's what's actually happening. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, the active ingredient researchers keep returning to when they look at garlic's effects on blood pressure, cholesterol, and circulation. But here's the thing. Allicin doesn't exist in a whole garlic clove. It only forms after the cells are damaged, after you chop, crush, or mince it. At that point, two substances inside the clove combine and produce allicin. That process takes around 5 to 10 minutes. Most people chop their garlic and put it straight into a hot pan. The heat stops the reaction before it finishes. You get the flavor. You get almost none of the cardiovascular benefit. Imagine the scene. You've grown the garlic yourself, pulled it from the ground, cured it, stored it properly. And then, in 10 seconds, at the hob, most of what makes it valuable disappears. The fix takes exactly as long as it takes to chop an onion. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Chop your garlic, set it aside, give it 10 minutes before it goes near heat. That's it. That's the whole change. Zero cost. 10 minutes you weren't using anyway. You've just protected most of what your garlic can do for your heart. One catch worth knowing. If you're on blood-thinning medication, mention garlic to your doctor. It has a mild, blood-thinning effect of its own. Not alarming, just worth knowing. Garlic, the crop most of us have grown for decades, turns out to have a timing trick almost nobody hears about. But heart health is only part of what quietly changes after 60. What comes next targets something most doctors don't mention until it's already affecting how long you can stay in the garden and how independent you stay. And the crop that addresses it is probably the last one you'd expect: bush beans and peas. Here's a number worth sitting with. After the age of 60, the average person loses around 0.5% of their muscle mass every single year. That sounds small. It isn't. After 75, the rate nearly doubles. The medical term is sarcopenia, but what it actually means is more personal than any medical term: the slow narrowing of what you can do alone. Bush beans and peas are one of the most direct dietary responses to that process. Not glamorous, but backed by some of the most straightforward long-term evidence in nutritional research. A study that followed over 3,300 people across 4 years found that higher legume intake, beans, peas, lentils, was consistently linked to better preservation of muscle mass in older adults. Not a lab result, not a short-term trial. 4 years, thousands of people, measurable difference in the muscle they held onto. The mechanism is straightforward. Your body needs protein to maintain muscle tissue. As you age, it becomes slightly less efficient at using the protein you eat, which means the requirement actually goes up at exactly the point most people start eating less. Beans and peas deliver a steady, digestible source of that protein at a cost that makes almost every other source look expensive. One important catch: plant protein has a slightly different amino acid profile than animal protein. It's missing certain building blocks your muscles need most. The fix is simple. Eat your beans and peas alongside a grain. Rice and beans. Peas on toast. That combination covers the full profile. One without the other is good. Both together is complete. Bush beans and peas, the most quietly underrated crops on this list, might be doing more to keep you gardening at 80 than almost anything else you're growing. Now, I want to show you a crop that removes every physical barrier to gardening entirely. No yard, no kneeling, no soil, just a jar on your windowsill. And the number behind it is one of the most surprising things in this whole list. Hot chili peppers. Here's something counterintuitive. The compound that makes a chili pepper hot is the same compound used in clinical-grade arthritis creams, the kind your doctor might actually recommend. The compound is capsaicin, and the reason it works for joint pain is almost paradoxical. Capsaicin activates the nerve fibers that carry pain signals, the ones responsible for that burning sensation when you bite into something too hot. It activates them so intensely, so repeatedly, that those nerve fibers temporarily exhaust themselves. They run out of the chemical they need to keep signaling pain. And in that window, that period of depletion, the pain signal to your brain goes quiet. The thing that causes pain switches off pain. Think about what that means in practice. The joint ache that makes kneeling down to weed difficult, or gripping a trowel uncomfortable. In the hands, knees, lower back, areas every gardener in their 60s and 70s knows very well. That's exactly where capsaicin creams are used clinically. You apply it regularly, the nerve fibers deplete, and the chronic ache starts to ease. Picture the chili plant sitting in your greenhouse or in a pot in a sunny corner, quietly producing a compound that's been standardized into pharmaceutical creams sold in chemists across the country. It was in your garden the whole time. One catch: don't try to make your own topical application from fresh chili juice. The concentration is uncontrolled, and the burn can be genuinely unpleasant in a way that has nothing therapeutic about it. The clinical creams use a carefully standardized, low concentration for a reason. Grow the chilies, eat them, enjoy them. For joint pain, the commercial capsaicin cream is the right vehicle. Hot chili peppers, the crop most people grow for heat, turn out to be carrying one of the most elegant pain mechanisms in your whole garden. Now, this is the crop I mentioned in the opening, the one you can grow in a jar on your kitchen counter in under a week. No soil, no kneeling, no garden space at all, and the number behind it is going to stop you in your tracks. Broccoli sprouts. 3-day-old broccoli sprouts contain up to 100 times more of a key brain protective compound than a full-grown broccoli head. 100 times. The compound is sulforaphane. Researchers have been studying it seriously for its role in reducing inflammation and oxidative stress in the brain, two of the key processes involved in cognitive decline. A mature broccoli plant has it, but only in small amounts, diluted across a large structure. A sprout is different. It's 3 days old. It's pushing everything it has into survival and rapid growth. It concentrates sulforaphane at levels a full-grown head simply can't match. The broccoli you've been buying at the supermarket your whole life is the diluted version. The sprout, sitting in a jar on your windowsill, is the original. The mechanism runs through something called the NRF2 pathway. Think of it as your body's own internal repair system, the one that fights cellular damage before it accumulates. Sulforaphane activates that system, and when it's active, it reduces the kind of chronic, low-level inflammation in the brain that builds quietly over decades and is increasingly linked to cognitive decline. Here's how to grow them. A wide-mouth mason jar, a tablespoon of broccoli seeds. Rinse them twice a day with clean water, drain them, leave them at an angle so air can circulate. In 3 to 5 days, a jarful of sprouts. No soil, no kneeling, no garden space at all. A windowsill and 5 minutes every morning. Picture that jar on your kitchen sill next to the kettle, the most unsexy thing in the garden, quietly containing something 100 times more potent than the broccoli in the vegetable aisle. It might be the smallest crop you ever grow and the one doing the most work. One catch: raw broccoli sprouts contain a compound called erucic acid alongside the sulforaphane. In very large quantities, several cups a day, every day, there's some debate about long-term effects. A small handful on eggs or in a salad is where the benefit sits without any of the noise. Treat it like a garnish that happens to be doing serious work. Don't eat a bowlful 3 times a day and call it medicine. Broccoli sprouts, the crop you can grow on your kitchen counter in under a week, might be the most accessible thing on this entire list and one of the most potent for your brain. Now, if you've grown sweet potatoes, and a lot of you have been growing them for years, I need to ask you something. What did you do with the leaves? Sweet potato leaves. Picture the pile of leaves you've thrown into the compost, season after season, maybe for decades. Sweet potato leaves contain nearly 5 times more lutein than spinach, around 1.2 times more than kale. Lutein, for anyone who hasn't come across it in that context, is one of the primary nutrients your eyes depend on to stay healthy as you age. It accumulates in the macula, the central part of your retina, and acts as a kind of internal filter against the oxidative damage that builds up over a lifetime of light exposure. The research on lutein and age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of vision loss in people over 60, is some of the most consistent in nutritional science. Higher lutein intake is repeatedly linked to slower progression and better preservation of central vision over time. And the richest source of it in your garden wasn't the vegetable, it was the leaves you were composting. Think about what that means. The fear of losing your sight, of not being able to read seed packets, spot the first signs of pest damage, see the color come up on a new flower. The nutrient most relevant to that fear was going in the bin. Here's the mechanism. Lutein is a carotenoid, same family as beta-carotene, the thing that makes carrots orange. Your body can't make it. You have to eat it. And once you do, it deposits directly into the eye tissue where it's needed, building up gradually into a kind of protective layer. It doesn't reverse damage already done, but it slows what's coming. The practical part is simple. Sweet potato leaves are edible and mild in flavor, somewhere between spinach and watercress. They cook down exactly the way spinach does. Sauté them in olive oil with garlic. Add them to soups. Use them anywhere you'd use a leafy green. The plant you've been growing just became twice as useful. One catch. If you've used any chemical treatments on your sweet potatoes, wash the leaves thoroughly and consider whether you're comfortable eating them directly. The leaves carry residues more readily than the tuber. Growing organically, you're fine. Sweet potato leaves, the part of the plant almost every gardener throws away, turn out to be protecting something most of us quietly worry about far more than we admit. And if you've just realized you've been composting something valuable, wait until you hear what the next crop did in a clinical trial, because it went head-to-head with one of the most common pain medications in the world. And it won. Turmeric, a clinical trial, a kitchen spice, a result that, when I first read it, I went back and checked the source twice. It had plenty behind it. Researchers took patients with osteoarthritis, one of the most common sources of chronic joint pain in people over 60, and compared a standardized curcumin extract, the active compound in turmeric, directly against ibuprofen. Same duration, measured outcomes for pain and physical function. The curcumin group and the ibuprofen group improved by comparable amounts. The difference was in the side effects. Ibuprofen works by inhibiting an enzyme called COX-1, which, in plain terms, is also responsible for protecting the stomach lining. Long-term ibuprofen use damages that lining. It's why doctors increasingly warn older patients away from regular NSAID use. The joint relief is real, but so is the gastric cost. Curcumin doesn't work through that pathway. The stomach side effects in the curcumin group were significantly lower. A spice your grandparents cooked with matched a pharmaceutical in a controlled trial, and was easier on the stomach. Now, picture the turmeric jar in your spice cupboard. It's been sitting there, possibly for months, doing a fraction of what it could. Because of one thing almost nobody knows. The critical catch, and this one genuinely matters. Curcumin on its own is poorly absorbed. You can eat turmeric every day and absorb very little unless you eat it with black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine that increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000%. That's not a typo. The traditional South Asian practice of combining turmeric and black pepper in cooking wasn't accidental. It was effectively a bioavailability trick that predated the science by centuries. No black pepper alongside your turmeric, and you're getting a fraction of what the research actually measured. Turmeric, the spice most people already have on their shelf, turns out to have one of the most well-documented cases for joint pain relief of anything on this list. Not a folktale, a clinical trial. But everything we've covered so far, memory, heart, muscles, joints, eyes, that's the body. What comes next goes somewhere deeper. The last 3 crops on this list are all pointed at the same thing, and the evidence behind them escalates with each one. I want to be direct about what these last 3 crops are about. We're not talking about joint pain anymore, or heart health, or even muscle loss. What comes next addresses the thing most people in their 60s and 70s carry quietly in the back of their mind and rarely say out loud. The fear of losing themselves, not just their independence, who they are. These 3 crops have the most direct, most studied, most specific evidence for protecting the aging brain. And they escalate. Each one takes the evidence one step further than the one before it. The last one is where this whole list has been heading. Kale had its moment. It was everywhere. Every menu, every smoothie. And then the backlash came, and a lot of people quietly went back to ignoring it. Which is a shame, because underneath the trend, the actual research on kale and brain health is some of the most compelling dietary evidence for Alzheimer's risk that exists. Here's the specific finding. A long-term study following over 900 older adults looked at a dietary pattern called the MIND diet, a combination of foods including leafy greens like kale, berries, nuts, olive oil, and fish. People who followed this pattern most closely had a 53% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to those who followed it least closely. 53%, more than half the Alzheimer's risk, linked to a dietary pattern with kale at its center. That's not a small effect. That's not the kind of number you see often in nutritional research. Here's the mechanism. Kale is dense in vitamin K, folate, and lutein, nutrients consistently associated with slower cognitive decline in aging populations. Vitamin K, in particular, has emerged in recent research as potentially significant for brain health, with studies showing lower levels correlating with poorer memory and cognitive function in older adults. Imagine 2 people, same age, same general health. One of them has been eating leafy greens regularly for years. The other hasn't. The MIND diet study suggests that over time, the difference between those 2 people, in terms of Alzheimer's risk, is substantial, not marginal. Substantial, one honest catch. The MIND diet study was observational. It tracked what people ate and what happened to them over time, rather than controlling their diet in a trial setting. That means it shows a strong association, not a guaranteed causal chain. The researchers themselves are careful about the language. What it tells us is that people who eat this way consistently tend to fare significantly better. Whether kale alone is doing the heavy lifting, or whether it's the whole pattern working together, is still being studied. Kale, the crop that survived its own trend cycle, turns out to have been worth taking seriously all along. But a study tracking what people eat is one kind of evidence. What if you could actually look inside the brain, at a real scan, and see what years of eating leafy greens actually does? That's exactly what researchers did. And what they found on those scans was something that stopped me. Spinach 2 people, same age, both in their late 60s, both reasonably healthy, reasonably active. You put them both in an MRI machine and look at their brains side by side. One of them has been eating leafy greens, spinach, kale, similar things, regularly for years. The other hasn't. What do the scans show? Researchers at Rush University in Chicago asked exactly that question. They followed 960 older adults over an average of 5 years, tracking what they ate and running cognitive assessments throughout. What they found, people who ate about 1 serving of leafy greens per day had a rate of cognitive decline measurably slower than those who ate little or none. How much slower? The equivalent of being 11 years younger, not metaphorically, not you'll feel sharper, measurably. On tested cognitive function, memory, processing speed, the kind of thing that shows up in assessments, the regular leafy green eaters were performing at a level consistent with someone more than a decade younger than their actual age. A 68-year-old eating spinach regularly was, cognitively, performing closer to a 57-year-old. That number landed differently for me than almost anything else in this list, because it isn't about disease risk or probability. It's about the actual functioning of your brain right now, today, as a direct reflection of what you've been eating for the past several years. Here's the mechanism. Spinach is high in folate, vitamin K, vitamin E, and lutein, all of which appear repeatedly in the research on cognitive aging. Folate, in particular, plays a role in regulating homocysteine, an amino acid that, at elevated levels, is consistently associated with faster cognitive decline and higher dementia risk. Think of homocysteine as a slow leak in the system. Spinach helps seal it. The current thinking is that it's not one compound doing one job. It's the combination, the overlapping action of multiple nutrients working through multiple pathways simultaneously that produces the effect the scans show, which is also why a supplement doesn't replicate it. You can't put a spinach leaf in a capsule. The catch. 1 serving a day is what the research points to. Roughly a large handful of raw spinach, or half a cup cooked. More than that isn't necessarily better. The benefit curve flattens. What matters here is consistency over time, not quantity on any given day. A small amount eaten regularly for years is what produces a brain that scans 11 years younger. A large amount eaten occasionally does considerably less. Spinach, the most ordinary crop on this entire list, turns out to be one of the most quietly powerful things you can grow for your brain. But here's the thing. Everything we've just covered, the risk reduction, the brain scans, the 11 years, that's all population-level evidence. Large groups, long time frames, patterns, and outcomes. What if someone went further than that? What if instead of scanning brains or tracking diets, researchers looked directly into the blood, at the actual biological markers that change before Alzheimer's even begins to show symptoms, and found something measurable there? That's what happened with the final crop on this list, and what they found is unlike anything else we've covered today. Blueberries. We've arrived at the last one, and I want to take a moment before we get into it. This crop closes the list for a specific reason. Not because it's dramatic to look at. Not because it's hard to grow. You probably already grow it. You may have been growing it for decades. And if you have, what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you think about every single punnet you've ever picked. Researchers didn't just track what people ate over time, the way the spinach and kale studies did. They didn't just look at brain scans. They took blood. And in that blood, they measured specific biological markers, proteins that appear in the bloodstream when the brain is under stress, when neurons are being damaged, when the processes that lead to Alzheimer's disease are quietly beginning, years before any symptom shows up. The markers they measured were tau, neurofilament light chain, and GFAP. Those names mean nothing to most people, and they shouldn't have to. In plain terms, these are the early warning signals, the things that change in your blood before you forget a name, before you lose a word mid-sentence, before any doctor would look at you and think anything was wrong. Neurofilament light chain, in particular, is an early signal that brain cells are under stress, like a dashboard light that comes on long before the engine fails. In people who ate blueberries daily, those markers were measurably different, lower, moving in the right direction, as though something in the blueberry was intercepting the process before it could take hold. Here's the mechanism. Blueberries are among the richest dietary sources of a group of compounds called anthocyanins, the pigments that give them their color. Anthocyanins do something unusual. They cross the blood-brain barrier, which most compounds can't do. Once inside, they reduce oxidative stress and neuroinflammation directly in brain tissue and appear to improve signaling between neurons, the actual communication between brain cells, which is one of the earliest things to deteriorate in cognitive aging. The scale of the evidence behind this is unlike anything else on this list. A study following over 16,000 people found that higher blueberry and strawberry intake was associated with a delay in cognitive aging of up to 2.5 years. Then the biomarker trial took it further, not just tracking outcomes in large populations, but finding the biological mechanism in the blood of individual people who ate them every day. 2.5 years of cognitive aging delayed. Blood markers of Alzheimer's measurably lower. In people eating a fruit, most of them already grew in their garden. One honest catch. The biomarker research on blueberries is compelling, but still relatively recent. The field is moving fast, the results are consistent, and the direction is clear. But researchers themselves would tell you the full picture is still being built. What we have is strong early evidence pointing in one direction, backed by large population data pointing in the same direction. That combination is about as solid as nutritional science gets at this stage. Eating a cup of blueberries a day is not a guarantee. Nothing in nutrition is a guarantee. But it is, right now, one of the most evidence-backed things a gardener over 60 can grow and eat for their brain. The real takeaway. Here's the thing that stayed with me longest after I put all of this together. Every crop on this list, from the rosemary by your back door to the blueberries at the end of the garden, is something this audience has been growing for years. Decades, some of you. Not because a study told you to, not because a doctor prescribed it, because you knew the way gardeners know things, that growing your own food and eating it fresh and close to the ground was the right way to live. The science didn't tell you to garden. You already were gardening. It just caught up with you. Let's look back at what we covered. Rosemary, the memory herb that actually works, but only at the right amount. Garlic, 10 minutes between the chop and the heat, and you keep most of what makes it valuable. Bush beans and peas, the quiet muscle protectors that could keep you gardening a decade longer than you would without them. Hot chili peppers, the crop that turns pain against itself. Broccoli sprouts, a jar on your counter, 5 minutes a day, 100 times more brain-protecting power than the broccoli in the produce aisle. Sweet potato leaves, the part you've been composting, 5 times richer in lutein than spinach. Turmeric with black pepper matched a painkiller in a clinical trial and went easier on the stomach. Kale, at the center of a dietary pattern linked to cutting Alzheimer's risk by more than half. Spinach, one serving a day, and your brain could be functioning 11 years younger than your age. And blueberries, the fruit most of you already grow, with blood test evidence of protection against Alzheimer's before it can even begin. None of these crops are exotic. None of them require a new garden, a bigger plot, or a different way of living. Most of them are already in your ground or on your windowsill. What changes today is not what you grow. It's what you know about what you're already growing. You've spent years with your hands in the soil, tending, observing, learning. It turns out, the science agrees, that was one of the smartest things you ever did. Now I want to hear from you. Which one of these surprised you most? Was it the broccoli sprouts, 100 times more potent than the full-grown head? The sweet potato leaves you may have been composting for years? The turmeric clinical trial? The blueberry blood markers? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and I'll be in there today. And if you've been growing any of these crops for years without knowing what they were quietly doing, tell me that too, because I suspect there are a lot of you. If this gave you something useful, a like goes a long way, and subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. Because the next video is something I've been putting together for a while. We're going deeper, not just what to grow, but the specific mistakes most gardeners over 60 make without realizing it that are quietly reducing everything their garden produces. Some of them are going to surprise you in exactly the way today's did. That one's coming soon. Don't miss it.